Today I'm replacing the rear brake pads on my 2012 Toyota RAV4. You can replace the brake pads and machine the rotors if there's still enough thickness there to machine them without them becoming under specifications, or you can replace the brake pads and the rotors, or you can be lazy like me and just pad slap. It's up to you, it's your vehicle. First thing you need to do is jack up the vehicle and remove the rear tires. Another thing I like to do before I get started is double check that my new pads match my old pads so I don't get everything torn apart and realize that I got the wrong parts from the parts store. I'll show you how to remove the rotors too if you need to replace them or machine them. First step, we want to take these two bolts loose that hold the caliper in place. I also like to stick a screwdriver in and depress the piston. I don't know if you can see that, but that just makes it easier to slide the caliper off if it's not depressed in place. These caliper bolts are 14 millimeter. Once you've cracked them loose, you should be able to spin them out by hand and pop the caliper out of place. I just set the caliper up here out of the way. You don't want to leave it dangling by the brake line. That can put too much stress on the brake line and cause leaks and danger in the future. You also want to make sure, since this is a floating caliper, these guys slide in and out freely. You might even take them apart and lube them up a bit if it feels like they're binding. If they get stuck in, then the caliper will stick in and wear your brake pads unevenly. Always compare your new parts against your old parts and see if there's any hardware you need to switch over. My new pads already have backing plates, but these spring clips here were on the old pads. They're basically wear indicator clips, so I'm going to swap those to my new pads. You also want to pay attention to where the spring clips went, upper or lower pad. My brake pads also came with this big bag of hardware. Basically all of these clips are on the caliper bracket as so. Pay attention to how they went in so that you can put the new ones in the same way. These guys should just pop off with a screwdriver. Be careful when you're taking these little clips off the brake pad because they like to go shooting across your driveway. If you're taking the rotors off, you'll want to take these two bolts to get the caliper bracket loose out of your way so that you can pull the rotors off. Normally you can bang these off with a hammer, hopefully not getting them too damaged unless you're replacing them and then you don't really care. If you're pulling them off to machine them and they're stuck, they've got these little holes in them that you can thread a couple of bolts into. When you tighten these bolts in, it'll pop the rotor loose for you. Under this drum looking like part of your rotor is the setup for your e-brake. You want to check out the wear under there and make sure everything looks good as well. My rotors are looking a little bit worse for the wear. There's also a tiny lip here, so they might be too thin to machine, and honestly, at $36 a piece, it's easier for me just to replace them. So I'm going to pop these two 17 millimeter bolts out of the caliper bracket, then put new rotors on. Like most rotors that have been on for a while, mine was a bit snug, so I thread these two bolts in and got everything loose. And I'll take a visual inspection. See these brake shoes? These are basically for your e-brake. I've got quite a bit of thickness left. Double check for any leaks, but it's looking good. Most new rotors come with some kind of thin coat of sealant or schmag or something on them, so I always spray them down with brake clean, wipe them off with a paper towel, make sure I've got clean surfaces so I don't have smoking brakes. These rotors also have a plug for e-brake adjustment. This guy came out of my old rotor. I want to make sure to swap it over to my new rotor so there's not a hole for dew, moisture and dirt or anything grubby to get in there. Again, just always checking to make sure all of the hardware is swapped from your old parts to your new parts. So I've got the new rotor in place. Now I can put the bracket back in the caliper and the wheel, then test ride it. So digging a little bit deeper into my new hardware kit, I found that I've got new springs, so I didn't even have to pop the old ones off, but you just always want to double check and make sure what you're putting back on looks the same as what you're taking off, and that if there's any hardware to swap, you've done the job. I've got the new pads in place. Before I can put the caliper back in, I need to compress it so that there's room for the new pads. I usually put an old brake pad in front of the piston so that I don't scrape it with my channel locks, and then you can squeeze it in place. Basically, you squeeze it till it goes flush or till it starts to resist. You always want to check your brake fluid level too when you do jobs like this. Normally you shouldn't have leaks, so the brake fluid level shouldn't go down, but some Jiffy Lube type places like to top off the brake fluid for you, even though that's actually a wear indicator. And when you depress these pistons, you can get a bunch of brake fluid streaming over the top of your reservoir. So always double check your reservoir when you do brake jobs. Once I have the brake caliper bolted on with the new pads in place, you want to step into the vehicle and pump up your brake pedal. This will bring your piston back up so that your brake pedal doesn't sink to the floor the first time you go take a test drive. And I'm also going to take a peek at my brake fluid reservoir, make sure nothing's overflowing, and then put the wheel back on. We'll torque it to 80 foot-pounds, then go to the other side. This may seem highly implausible, but I have seen people put their brake pads on backwards with the metal against the rotor instead of the pad against the rotor. You'll probably notice right away when you're metal to metal and everything's scraping, but just make sure everything goes back together the way that it came apart so you don't have to do the job twice or end up damaging new parts. Now I can put the caliper in place, then the wheel back on. I'll torque my wheels to 80 foot-pounds, test drive the vehicle, torque again. I always double torque. I don't want anything loosening up. I definitely don't ever want anybody's wheel falling off. I'm not adverse to safety, but that's basically how you replace brake pads and rotors on a 2012 Toyota RAV4. Good luck.